2024. James is starting all the technology. Please be advised, everyone, that present, that this is a public meeting and it's been live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Do we have any declarations of interest? Appears to be none. Apologies for absence. James, you're aware of some.
Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Karidi Divandu and her substitute is Councillor Orba.
Wonderful. And so just to rub it in, she did send a photo of where she was, and it was a beautiful beach somewhere with blue skies and sunshine. So, minutes of the overview and scrutiny committee meeting held 6th of February, which are on page 6. Do we have anybody who raises any objections to them? Councillor Laming.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's not an objection to the minutes, but it is a query relating to the minutes. So item number 91, I just wondered, has the council received any funding yet from the local authority housing fund after making the bid?
Absolutely, yeah.
Chairman, if I could try and answer that for you, we received notification that we've been allocated everything we asked for in the expression of interest, which to my recollection was about £280,000. So we'll be looking at how we best proceed alongside councillors.
Thank you. Right, say it out loud for all our viewers. We'll accept those minutes as being accepted as a true record. Chairman's announcements. I have nothing to announce, so we'll move straight on to public speaking.
There's no public speaking, Chair.
Don't know how much. Every time I see Chairman's announcements, I feel like I should say, was it Oscar Wilde and nothing to announce except my genius or something, wasn't it? Or nothing to declare except my genius. I would sound like the most pretentious man in Britain if I'd said something like that, but there's something in my head which wants to say it every time. Just to show myself up, yes, but I would have shown myself up by doing so I don't. There we go, it's a good way of saying it without saying it. Cabinet report. Sorry.
Objection on the matter of fact.
And no one would disagree. Let's move on to the cabinet reports. Our agenda item number 6, but agenda item 7 from the cabinet reports, the strategic performance, risk and finance report for Q3, and this is being led by Darren and Corinne. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report gives an overview of the Council's Q3 position for strategic performance, risk and finance. I'm just going to highlight a few key points in the finance sections before handing over to Corinne, who will present the strategic performance and risk elements. So at the end of December, BDC is facing a number of inflationary and demand pressures on the cost of services. There's a total pressure of £341,000 on the total cost of core services. This is offset overall by continued buoyant investment income due to the council having higher cash balances and higher interest rates that we're receiving than anticipated. At the end of December, BDC had spent nearly 10 million, 9.6 million on capital schemes, with an expected forecast outturn at this time of 13.7 million. The report continues on to detail variances across each service delivery area. There's an additional recommendation on this report for this quarter that is a request for an agreement to purchase a further £49,901 shares in Broadland Living to bring the total equity investment of Broadland Living to £50,000. That's just to bring your attention to an extra recommendation on the report. Just stop there for any questions on the finance elements of the report.
It's like having Steve Riley in the meeting, not pressing the button. Oh, he is there. Sorry, he's just ignoring. Yeah, sorry. Would anybody like to ask anything at this point? Yeah, I thought you would, Fran. That's what I was looking at. You must have. Go on, Fran.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just looking down my list of things I wanted to ask, but there we go. Just a couple of things, really. Can you tell us the purpose of increasing the number of shares for Broadland Living from 100 to 50,000? I just wondered, because I know obviously 100 was to get the limited company up and running, etc. But I just wondered what the purpose of that was. I also, it's actually on page 18, 3.5, it says about we've got additional new burdens funding received from the government, 68,000. I just wondered what that was as well. Thank you. And also, if we can explain, it's on page 19, it's 3.13. We're talking about community services here. There's additional container management costs of 139,000, which we're saying is subject to a challenge with the contractor. And I just wonder if we could sort of give us a little bit more information around that. And if you could say anything else as well, really, about the 52,000 additional costs for missed bins. If you could just sort of flesh those subjects out, that would be very helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The new burdens funding is we periodically receive funding from central government to assist us with, so if we've got a particular project that we've had to roll out that's created an additional administrative burden on the authority, we'll get additional funding from the government aside from that, which has been set out at the start of the financial year as part of the central government settlement. So that's additional funding that department has received to carry out their functions. Yeah, sure.
Just to add to that, Councillor Wymont, so that's in relation to the new burdens funding for the elections team. So it's on the back of we got initial funding for the rollout for voter ID, and now we've got the postal voter ID requirement. It's new burdens funding for rolling that out as well.
So if I just take the Broadland Living question, obviously when we set the company up, we very much only put in a notional amount of £100 sort of thing. But obviously any company that you set up always needs some equity in it sort of thing, very much to make sure it's got some cash flow to balance it. And given that that company is now active, it's going to have the 6 resettlement properties. We reviewed the figure and thought actually we need to make sure there is a proper level of equity investment into that company, and that's why we came up with a figure of actually needing to increase it. You could come up with various numbers, but £50,000 felt like a sensible level of equity investment in the company of the size of Broadland Living.
Okay. Right, thank you.
Your other questions were on the waste, so I don't know if Simon wants to come in on them.
Thank you.
Oops, that's right, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. Yes, with regard to the £139,000 additional costs around container deliveries, it's fundamentally down to a different interpretation of what the contract says. So the contract requires us to pay Veolia for the delivery of bins. Our interpretation, so for example, is if they're delivering a suite of food waste bins, which is two bins, that's one delivery. Veolia's interpretation of that is that's 2 deliveries, so they would charge us for each individual bin rather than collecting them together as they have in the past. So that's why it's subject to a challenge, because we don't interpret the contract the same way they do. So that's that particular one. The other one on the miss bins is actually, while it's an additional cost, it's actually a reduction over previous years under the old contract. So if a bin is missed and it is down to the resident, but it's deemed that the resident has made an error, and we will go back to collect the bin, but we have to pay for that return to collect that bin. It's not where Veolia has missed the bin, because we don't pay for them to go back to collect a bin. But it is a reduction on previous contract years, because we've changed the process by which we will return for missed bins.
Yep.
It wasn't on a subject, but I just wanted to say a positive, because there are lots of positives in this report as well. I'm really pleased to see the improvement in the graduate and the apprentice roles that we get. I think that's really, really positive, because obviously that's something we've been looking to do, well, not looking to do, we have been doing. So to improve upon that, I think was really good. So I just want to say that positive as well as picking holes in the report too. Thank you.
Anybody else got anything they'd like to say? Jonathan.
Yeah, just looking at obviously the variances there. On 3.11, the individuals and families, the increased demand for spot purchased accommodation for rough sleepers. The funding was there for 7 cases. In my mind, that 7 cases seemed quite high, and we're sort of saying we're supporting 17 now. That seems to be a big spike. Is there anyone here who can answer if that is a big spike or if that's just going to keep going up? Because obviously that, to me, that seems to have spiked quite a lot, and I just wondered if it was going to keep going up or if this was something which they were aware of and they knew for the reason.
Mike's indicating he'd like to say something about this.
Thank you, Chairman. And we think that's just a spike and that will come down. So we're not expecting that to go up and up, but that's something that we'll monitor closely. Rough sleeping is just it comes and goes. It just depends on where we are at any given time. So we're not expecting that just to keep rising.
Thank you. Just to obviously check that it's not something that someone else might have done somewhere else that's causing us to have a problem, and we've just got to keep an eye on it.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Can I go to page 22 of the report? And it's a line item at the bottom, Horizon Centre Capital Maintenance. You've got original budget of 30k, and it's gone up to 724 now. 782k. Can you explain why that's the case? Is slippage of 724, so it's quite a big increase.
I think we're all rushing to answer that. That slippage is very much the fit out costs and the final part of the purchase of this building. So actually, it's probably not a very good description. It's basically the capital maintenance and remaining costs relating to moving into this building.
So why was it only 30k when it was first budgeted?
So it was obviously when we originally were saying we were going to move in earlier. So actually, it was mainly planned for the previous year for the fit out costs and completion. We didn't actually move in until May, so some of it slipped from that sort of early year into the current year, which is why we only thought we were going to have £30,000 of maintenance costs in the current year. But obviously, with the moving in May, the remaining part of the fit out costs and works were all done in April and May.
That wasn't spent last funding.
Correct.
Could I just ask, with regard to 3.7, the transformation and ICT digital, and that's it says here an additional 93,000 costs for several reasons, and some of those reasons, I'm just wondering, will the new telephony contract and the customer experience program deal, you think, with some of those things? But I know that's about increasing our IT capacity and the speed at which we deal with things, and I know that we're on a much improved contract now with in certain regards with new things that we've signed up to. Do we think that will deal with some of those higher costs?
Thank you. So the costs that you see there in terms of additional costs that are coming through are mainly related to either high usage around mobile and data use. We have got a project which is separate to customer experience, which is looking at data usage and making sure we have a more fit for purpose contract, which ekes out value for money. So we will see them costs come down, specifically related to mobile phones and data costs. In relation to some of the other software costs that are coming through that are contributing towards that 93k, they are more related to our line of business applications, so not necessarily related to the customer experience programme. So things that we've seen there where suppliers have said that we need to move across to the cloud and have sort of forced that upon us almost. We've had to absorb some of them costs. So that's what you see coming out in those additional costs there. So I think in answer to your question, is the customer experience programme is not going to deal with some of those additional costs that are coming through, but it will have savings in related to things around customer demand and how we better service that demand, but not related to the costs that you see in the paper today.
Thank you. If anybody, Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just refer you to page 37 under the progress towards the saving of 8.6 million as a result of the putting the two councils together and moving to the new property. Is there a breakdown at all for that the 8.6 million saving over the 5 years anyway?
So the 8.6 million was very much the target set in that initial business case 5 years ago, and as part of that there wasn't a detailed breakdown particularly where it was going to come from. With regard to the savings being delivered, we did report to, I think it was this overview scrutiny committee a while ago, and looking at actually the breakdown of the savings that have been delivered to date. But what I've suggested, actually, this is obviously coming to an end 31st of March 24, so actually we will have that final position. There will be the end of the 5-year position, so it may be appropriate for this committee to look at that year-end delivery against that target once we've obviously gone past that position point.
Emma's got some information on that. Also worth saying that we are going to be looking at the costs and savings and the whole move here as part of what we're looking at overview and scrutiny, and I'm sure Sinead can remember the date far better than me, but it's coming up in the next few months that we start to look at that.
Around
September. Well, we've got a whole 6 months to look forward to. How will we count the days away until that happens? But we're that's coming up later in the year, so we'll be able to look at that in more detail.
And I'm sure Tony knows this, but in the bottom right hand corner there is that high level overview of how that 8.6 came together. So I'm sure you've seen that, but I just wanted to make sure it's not, we haven't done that. There are some figures in there and kind of the headlines against that 8.6 there.
Thank you. If Martin's indicating, I think he's thinking, no, I won't, but no, go on.
I was looking at page 25 on the measures on there, and there's the two regarding the council tax and the business rate collection, which I don't ever remember them slipping before. But I noticed in both of them on the action taken, it says we're working with the supplier to resolve the issues. So there's two things, is it expected that the catch-up will happen, but also working with the suppliers to resolve the issues? Is there additional cost in engaging with the suppliers to remedy the situation?
I know we've got, Corinne's got to finish off giving her report, but someone wanted the best person to answer this, give the answer to that point, and then we'll go to Corinne to sort of deal with her element.
I think that there's two factors at play in this indicator. There's the general sort of a pressure on people's budgets. So that's obviously one of the things that we are noticing. Actually, people are finding it more difficult to pay their council tax and business rates. So that will have an impact on this indicator. And the second impact I very much refer to there is we obviously went live with the new joint revenue and benefits system on the 1st of December. So that's a very significant project. Sort of you don't move revenue and benefit systems very often, and the decision we made was to go to the new Civica cloud-based version of the software, and we're the first in the country to go onto that new version. Not surprisingly, there has been some teething issues. When you go first on a really complicated system, there's always a bit of a challenge, and actually we've been working very closely with the supplier to actually rectify these issues as quickly as possible. Obviously, when we went live, we were very much hoping actually got in 1st December, give it a month later and everything would be up fine, working fine. But in actual fact, we've had a slightly longer period of actually disruption and working with the supplier. We now feel that we're in a good position. Actually, we're getting things sort of working as they should, with a number of bug issues on it reducing. So we are making significant progress. But the issue we've got is we're now coming straight up to the annual billing time. So actually this time of recovery from the go live to actually annual billing, it's not been quite as quick as we'd like. However, we have got a plan to make sure we get back on track. So it might be that actually some of the outstanding money we haven't quite collected in March for the end of the year, so we might be slightly low on the indicator, but that doesn't mean that actually we won't continue to collect the money. So I think all this has done is delayed our recovery processes slightly, but actually overall we're still expecting that this authority will have overall very good collection rates, but we won't know the actual figure until the end of the year, particularly with some of our business rates. Yes, some people have some large bills. If they suddenly pay us £100,000 on the 31st of March, it'll probably add up to another 0.1% on the collection rate. If they don't pay us until 1st of April, it won't. So there are some timing issues that always affect this, and we very much keep trying to collect right until the end of the 31st of March to get the best collection rate possible. So I think it's fair to say it's challenging, but still at that level, we are still looking at a high-performing authority.
Thank you. Can I ask Corinne to give her report? I wouldn't want to miss her.
Thank you. So just as a summary, the position that you see in front of you today around performance is up until the end of Q3, so the end of December. Overall, it's a positive picture with 18 green indicators, 5 amber and only 3 red. We can see the red indicators, and just to give you a summary of those 3, at the top of the page there, you've got the consolidated demand on housing. I'm sure will be no surprise to you in terms of the continual increasing pressure relating to homelessness, but particularly this report covering that Christmas period, and we always do see peaks at that time of year. Prevention work continues, but demand is increasing, and you'll note that in comparison to previous years, that indicator is higher due to some of the economic factors that we are seeing and the influences there. You've got the external funding to support growth. So at the point of writing this report, you'll see that indicator is currently red. However, due to timing of the report since then, we have received some Norfolk Environmental Credits funding. That funding is not reflected in the figure. So based on that being reflected in Q4, we anticipate that indicator to turn green by the end of the year. And you should see that come through in your Q4 report. And then lastly, staff retention. So the current average rate of turnover, should it continue at that, it will mean that we miss our target of 10% turnover, with the forecast figure at the end of the year being predicted at just over 15%. I think we know that that measure is influenced quite significantly by the labour market, and I know there's quite a lot of work going on around exit interview feedback and using that feedback to improve and make improvements going forward, working with specific service areas. So that's everything on the performance side. Just to give you a quick summary on the risk register, so you'll see that there's 4 risks that remain unchanged, with our cybersecurity risk still remaining one of the highest risks on the risk register. In relation to the changes on the other 2 risks, where we have decreased the risk score, we have BDC M4, so that's ambitions in the delivery plan do not match the capacity of the organisation. So as we have now just gone through setting a new delivery plan with the resource supported underneath that, we have reduced that threshold, and that's the risk score that you see there. And BDC P3, so implications arising from the government's resource and waste strategy and the Environmental Act 2021, with a reduction in the risk score there as well. Thank you, Chair. I'll open the floor to questions.
Thank you. Yes, Peter.
Thank you for the report. I mean, if I look at the report, your initial opening statement said it was a positive picture. But if I look in some detail, I see 12 areas are improving, but 12 areas are declining. 2 of those are in the red sector, so it doesn't feel quite as positive as you suggested. Would you like to comment? A question for Rodney as well, please. I've just received my council tax demand by post. Is that anything to do with the changes that you've made in revenues and benefits, or is that just something that we have returned to for some reason?
Thank you for your question. So I'll take the first question. So in relation to the comment around the positive outlook on the report, I think with 18 indicators currently performing as green, but also knowing that there will be a shift in particularly one of those red indicators to the green, puts us in a good position for end of year. We do have some declining direction of travel on some of those indicators. Yeah, direction of travel on those indicators, and they are the ones that we will continue to monitor closely to make sure we're proactive around putting interventions in place to ensure they don't decline any further. Thank you.
With regard to billing, we do certainly send out loads of bills by email. I think we're about 7,000 of the total bills go out by email, and they are going out. We are aware there have been a couple of instances where actually people have previously signed up for e-bill and we've had to revert them back to a paper bill because of certain, I think, some technical issues means that some of them haven't quite transferred over correctly. So there are a few instances that we're aware of that actually people have previously signed up for e-bill. It could well be, and actually we can certainly look at it and actually update it.
All of us seem to fit that category.
Really?
Yeah.
We've all had paper copies. We're questioning why, because I certainly have changed my preference to.
I will need to take that off.
Everyone's nodding and saying.
We will look into that. I'll say.
Councillor saying, you've got paper bill. Do you want to just hand up?
And you used to get it on email.
Yeah.
I don't ever remember seeing it.
So the test worked.
It was all planned, was it?
It was all planned.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for the feedback note. But seriously, it's useful to have the feedback. What I would suggest is if you're hearing this, and I'm not being flippant about it, if you are hearing this, it's useful for the team to have that feedback because we don't know what we don't know until you feed that back to us. So it is useful so that Rodney can take that feedback away. And if you are hearing that from residents, again, it's really useful for us to hear that. So that we can paint that picture and be able to then the team can then look behind that data and understand why is that happened, and then we can look to rectify it. Puzzled, so I'm assuming he's not had that level of feedback to date. So again, the plan worked.
No, obviously we get a lot of responses and lots of communication. It's certainly not something I've heard, and actually, of figures where actually there's been so far this week 6,500 bills have gone out by email, and obviously there's some reason that we seem that councils are the ones we may have reverted. So yeah, I can assure you we check that.
Martin.
Again, the plan worked.
I think the other comment on the bills, and I don't know whether it's because it's changed systems, is that if you look at last year's bill, look at this year's bill, look at the changes, the percentages don't quite match what's actually coming through on the bills either.
Can I just, is that on the social care precept element? Again, I would love if you could forward on your copies of your bill if you wouldn't mind sharing them so we can look into them.
Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask the current? Yes, Emma.
So I just wanted to ask a question about staff retention being in the red. And I know that we talked about the labour market. Obviously, the more disruption to the staff and the more disruption to the organisation potentially rolls forward to the residents, plus all the on-cost for recruiting and training. So aside from wages, I was just wondering what feedback you've had so far in exit interviews and what the main focus points are.
So staff retention, I do think this is a really interesting one in terms of what is the right target And I think we are seeing the labour market change quite a lot. I was talking about this morning in terms of the younger generation. Can't believe I'm saying that myself. It's quite depressing, really, isn't it? Yeah, moving swiftly on. Look at work very differently. So it isn't a job for life anymore. It is very much coming in, doing something for 18 months to 2 years and moving to the next thing. So I think part of it is recognising that. The exit interview take-up has increased hugely at 85%, which really gives us a really good picture for the reasons for why. And very largely speaking, they are really positive reasons why, and it is a lot of career progression. And whilst we're a big organisation, we are not a huge organisation. So the ability to move on and progress through it is limited somewhat. So being able to then actually get people into a position whereby they feel able to move on into jobs outside is quite rewarding. To give you the assurance in terms of where do we find issues, what we do with that data is then drill down to each assistant director level and compare things like staff retention, staff sickness, and other issues, so that we can get to the nub of an issue if there is a nub of an issue and within a certain service area. So we do make sure that we do that as well to give you that assurance. But we're not seeing anything that gives alarm bells and gives cause for concern. And as we say, we are starting to see that steady off. But I think that 15% is probably more realistic in what we're going to see moving forward, rather than that 10%, because of the way the job market has changed quite a lot.
Can I just say that it would be nice if, I don't know if we discussed this, but perhaps if any report is done into why that is increasing based on the exit, the way you described it, exit interviews. Sounds like something much more serious than exit interview. But it would be interesting for ONS to have a report on what the results of those show, if it shows a particular picture or something that we can learn from.
So what I can do in the Q4 update that you'll receive ordinarily, yeah, is that the right word? Oh, flipping heck. Getting old, aren't I? What I'll do is I can expand that narrative at your next quarterly report, just to give you a bit more detail on those exit reasons, so then you can see that, and then if there's anything from that you want to drill down to, then we can then absolutely do that.
Tony.
Mr. Chairman, just as an extension of my colleague, Councillor Tavell's question, if I just refer you to page 40 regarding the Horizon survey. Now, that tells me that 46.3% of respondents completed the Horizon survey, of which just over 2/3 said they were very happy with the working environment and conditions. 46.3%? I'd say that's pretty poor, really. I'm just wondering if there is any link to question being asked previously and their poor respondents.
So that 46% is those that work in this building. So it's not everyone that did the survey works in this building. So we've got depot staff, we've got leisure staff. So out of everyone that completed, those were the ones that were able to, because they work here. So I know it seems low, but it's those that work in the building. And looking at the data, I do think, I will be brutally honest, we are at the point where I don't know what else we can do to make this building as brilliant as this building is. I'm very biased, but a lot of the feedback is tweaks around bits and pieces, and personally, I don't think there is much more that we can do. Some of it is around cleanliness, and we are dealing with that through looking at the cleaning contracts and getting that improved. And other bits is around the ability to be able to sit with teams, and that's around that flexible working and just trying to kind of find your feet and how it works. Very, very different to the last two buildings that we have. I mean, some councils didn't step foot in Thorpe Lodge or the South Norfolk House, but both were very, very different buildings, and it just takes a while sometimes to settle into it. But to give you the assurance, there's nothing in there that we as a management team went, that's a real problem, we've got a problem there. So I think you'll see that things will settle down quite a bit more, and there are some further improvements that we're making that will hopefully move that forward.
Shane.
Thank you. Still on the subject of staffing, if you can look at Appendix 2, page 50, there's a graph there that shows that the success of the Help Hub is going up exponentially. And the question I have is, has there been any kind of indication as to where you might think that rise might plateau, or where it's going to impact on the ability of the current staff to be able to manage it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just hand that over to Mike or Kerry if they're willing to answer the question for you.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So we're going to be doing some work in Q1 around demand management, just to look at where we are at the moment. It's continuing. There's a lot of differentials in terms of the demand and where it comes from. We're looking at potentially, and we've got a paper coming in, an exempt element tonight, which I won't talk about now, but that could just cause demand in its own right. But that overall demand, what we'll do is we're establishing where that demand is coming from and why that demand is being created. So that'll look at where our capacity for staffing will need to be in the future. So are we going to see a continuous rise? If we do see a continuous rise, is that a good thing or a bad thing? So there's a lot of work to do in Q1 to understand where that demand is coming from, and ultimately staff resource.
Okay, Martin.
Thank you. Mine once again around the staff retention, but it's also around. I noticed in the earlier section against the finance. So we've got the issues with staff retention, but also again around actually recruiting, because again the additional costs are because of agency cover. So again, you've got a double whammy effectively there. So we can't keep the staff, but then we also got agency staff. So just to comment on there, I know the market is a bit tight.
I think just to say that, I mean, it's one of those double-edged swords, isn't it, where you're losing staff, because obviously you're losing staff and you don't want to lose them, but you also, if you're seen as a council that's very progressive, as an organisation that's very progressive, who builds, trains good staff, that word gets around, and actually you end up, in some cases, being able to recruit people who know that spending 2, 3, 5 years with you can also be a really good career boost. So you actually get people in on that basis. And yeah, so it's that whole thing of where is a good figure? Is 10% a good figure? 15% actually you could argue is a good figure in the current market, but that's not what we're measuring ourselves against. So but like you say, then there's further costs from recruitment, from agency staff and the like. So Emily, you want to say something?
Yeah, so I think just on the kind of the rounded picture with that. So obviously, if we have agency staff, there is a higher cost to that, but it is something that we manage and we monitor and we keep an eye on. So areas whereby we've had to supplement through agency staff because we've had trouble recruiting. So I'm going to pick on Helen's area and her parting gift to us, her last Broadland committee meeting. So her kind of parting gift to us, Helen's worked really hard to use the apprenticeship route through with planning, because we recognise it's hard to recruit, but we also needed to spend money to recruit to get the planners in. But we're now in a position whereby she's leaving us with 4 senior planners when we needed 2. So we've been able to then move the budget around so that actually we can get them in a really good position and we can get them trained to take the more principal planner posts. So we've been able to be flexible with that, but she's leaving us in a really good position of, blimey, we've been able to get 4 senior planners. Part of that as well is around the reputation that we're now getting across the county and wider, in terms of, we're a good recruiter, we're a good place to work, we've got a modern office. There's a big platform to work on, and all of that is starting to see that come through. But we are, with all of our agency staff, looking at exit strategies for that. There will always be the need for agency staff in some areas. We're never going to completely move away from that, but it's a conscious effort to look at how we balance recruitment with agency so that we're spending the public money in the best possible way, but getting the best possible staff in as well.
And also, I know we did a lot of work a couple of years ago around the exit interviews and the responses from that, and I know it's a hard thing to try and there. So the rate of getting responses from exit interviews, has that increased now from the position we were in?
Yeah, so when we looked at that a couple of years ago, I think we were about a 35% response rate. We're now 85%. And that's working through really well, and it's enabling us to, where we need to, delve into other areas. And anecdotally, the 15% are ambivalent. I'm not leaving for a bad reason, a good reason. I'm just leaving, and I don't feel the need to talk about it, and that's fine as well. So we are getting some really rich data now, which is really helpful.
I think we've had a good discussion on this. I'd like to move to the recommendations, which I'd like to take in block. All those in favour of the recommendations, please raise your hand.
And that's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation and answering a range of questions. Thank you, everyone. We move on to what would be on the Cabinet Minutes agenda item 8, adoption of the Greater Norwich Local Plan, which is Adam is going to give us a presentation. Whilst Adam sorts himself out, also it's a perfect opportunity, as has been mentioned, this is Helen's last meeting, and I can speak of some personal experience in that she was my wife's boss for a while at South Norfolk, and my wife only had good things to say about her. And when she was looking to move councils, she very nearly worked for Broadland and South Norfolk purely because of Helen. And I think that should be noted that she has an excellent reputation within the planning community. And planners are real gossips. They talk across councils with each other, and you know who's good and you know who's bad. But only ever good things have been said about Helen, and with any organisation she works for, we'll miss her. So we should acknowledge all the excellent work she's done over the years. So thank you, Helen. But at that point, we'll hand over to Adam first.
So I'll just give a short 5-minute presentation to give you a flavour of the Greater Norwich Local Plan. And obviously, Helen's here to answer questions as well. It's a document that's been a long time in the gestation. It's sort of been 8 years of preparation, which sounds an incredibly long time, and it is, but the average for preparing planning documents can be, or is, 7 years, and this is notable because it's a sub-regional plan. As this slide indicates, we've got all the common sort of planning themes that you'd expect. Obviously, this plan has a focus on the housing crisis, but also endeavours to create policies which will ensure we get sustainable, beautiful and high quality homes. Again, as you'd expect, and especially for an area such as ours, there's an emphasis on the natural and built environment and protecting and enhancing that, and we also look at climate change. This next slide starts to sort of break those sort of big themes, if you like, down into the more sort of pragmatic sides of planning, because it's worth remembering that this document is about to potentially begin its working life. It will be used on a daily basis in determining planning applications, and it's also something of a bidding document. I'm biased, but I would say it's one of the documents that we prepare which has arguably the biggest impact on the future direction of the district. And so you've got in there specific requirements about build standards, specific policies about the environment, specific elements of infrastructure that are being proposed within site allocations. It's worth saying that the plan itself consists of 7 strategic policies dealing with all the big subjects you'd like, ranging from housing, the economy, infrastructure, the environment and so on. And then across the 3 districts there's a total of 130 specific site allocations. So that ranges from the 1,400 homes at Merritt's Park at Taverham down to smaller allocations of 20 or so homes. The backbone of any local plan is its settlement hierarchy. So as you'd expect, the focus of future development is on Norwich and the urban fringe. That's where the jobs are, that's where the transport links, the facilities and so on is. But there's also emphasis on the rural part of the district. There are allocations in the main town of Aylsham. There are allocations in key service centres of Acle and Blowfield and so on. And we have got allocations in the Broadland villages. Housing steals the limelight. I suppose it's just the nature of where we are as a country, but there are allocations in there for employment, strategic scale employment in the growth triangle, which is a plan we adopted back in 2016, and also at the airport. This is quite literally the key diagram of the plan. So it's worth pointing out that this builds on the previous plan, which was the joint core strategy that we adopted in 2014. Back then we didn't have the Northern Distributor Road. It continues the themes that we saw in the joint core strategy. So you can see that what we refer to as the A11 Tech Corridor coming up from the southwest and then across and through the city into the growth triangle, and that emphasis on development going into the northeast growth triangle. This next slide just sort of gives you a sense of where we're at and where we're going. So we had the inspector's report in mid-February. Virtual plans require modifications. We consulted on those modifications at the back end of last year, so the public have had a chance to see those. We now have the choice to adopt the plan with those modifications, and you've got the dates there, with Broadland Council being at the end of the month. This slide just gives you a snapshot of the main benefits of the plan. It's important to say that writing a local plan is a must-have. It's the driving force of the planning system. If we didn't adopt it at this stage, there would be a serious risk, as the report outlines, of government intervention. Having a joint plan is a serious piece of kudos, I think, because this is only the second time that a sub-regional area such as ourselves has adopted a second joint plan. Central Lincolnshire is the other example. And also, from a very pragmatic point of view, this local plan would give us a 5-year land supply, and that's really important for taking control of future development in the area, and puts us at lower risk of predatory planning applications in less sustainable locations. And then finally, what happens upon adoption? So under the regulations, there is a 6-week period for legal challenge through the High Court on the procedural approach to how the plan was prepared. So that would take us through to mid-May. As I said, this is an important sort of bidding document which shows that the area is open for business. So we'll be preparing sort of glossy versions of the plan, and there's an interactive map. Lastly, there's sort of various other follow-on work streams. So we've got proposals to prepare supplementary planning documents, which is again sort of standard for how local plan work operates. And in the fullness of time, we will, much like the Forth Bridge, be looking to do a new local plan to take us forward. So we're maintaining a sort of 10 to 15 year horizon on future development. That's about it, Chair.
Thank you for the overview and framework of or outline of where we're going with this as well, and dates and times, which I think is useful. Has anybody got anything they would like to ask? Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I've got sort of questions about the strategy, really. If you could explain to me a little bit more about where the information comes from in terms of the growth strategy for, where this plan is based on, this strategy. How have you gone about deciding the percentage growth that you're going to expect to get, the types of businesses you're going to, expect to attract? you know, the base data for this, there must be some sort of, core trends that you're trying to reflect, maybe. So just a little bit about that, really, about what were you trying to achieve with this, apart from obviously all the practical things about the land plans and all those things which are really important. But what is the underlying background?
So I suppose the background is jobs and homes. So there's a thing called the East of England forecasting model, and we employed consultants to run that methodology for us, which looks at our labour market, looks at our areas of the economy, and that sort of kicks out the figure of 33,000 jobs over the plan period. So that's the sort of first pillar, if you like. The second pillar is housing. For that, the government sets a standard methodology in planning practice guidance, and that requires us, and there's very little scope to diverge from this, I have to say, that requires us to look at the population projections for the area, look at the house prices, look at the earnings to house price ratio of the area. There's a formula we have to follow for that, and that kicks out the housing numbers we need. So for this whole sub-region, when you add the 3 districts together, you're approximately looking at 2,000 homes per year for the lifetime of the plan. That obviously ebbs and flows depending on how applications turn into permissions that turn into developments on the ground. But ultimately it's that sort of figure of around 2,000 a year. And as the numbers in the presentation show, our requirement was about 40,000 homes. We've got a plan which gives us up to 45,000 homes, which is about 11% buffer. And having that buffer is really important because inspectors are looking for assurance that the plan will deliver the homes that are required, because that's a really big drive within government planning policy.
Sorry, me again. What about, I know I mentioned about build standards in there. Is there anything at all about sort of green homes and forcing builders to promote things like ground source, air source heat pumps, solar panels, that sort of thing, ventilation? Is that included in as part of this?
We included what requirements we could do. The emphasis of government policy over the last decade has been to drive building standards through the building regulations system rather than planning policy. The argument being that it would just create lots of confusion for developers because each council would adopt its own building standards, and obviously there is a viability concern. So we've gone for what standards we can. We've put in a requirement there for water efficiency as far as we're allowed in terms of guidance, but to a large extent the emphasis here is on building regulations as setting a minimum acceptable level. But it's worth saying, and Helen probably know more than me about this, but the building regulations are gradually ratcheting up as we move towards net zero and other carbon related targets.
Anybody else got anything they would like to ask? Jonathan, and then we'll have Peter after that.
Yeah, all makes complete sense to me, having obviously the districts working together because we're all in the same area, so obviously the collaboration there working together seems good. Having the housing linked with the employment and bringing all those things in. The concern I have is that obviously on with the plan there's a lot of the infrastructure that is well, it's noted on the maps, if you know what I mean, but obviously we know that there's a few issues with these things, and obviously for me, it all sort of fits together and has to be one thing that all works together. Now, I know that obviously, well, the Conservative councillors are all for all these things, but obviously we know that there's issues with block and things. So for me, does it work if you can't have all the road improvements and have the infrastructure you need to make it happen? And obviously that would be something which would be a problem. Obviously you could say, well, we can put all the housing, put all the employment in, but people do need to get to the house, you know, the houses and the employment. And so it's just my concern that at the moment we're very, very supportive of all this, and we feel that it's a really good thing. But we know that there are people who aren't supportive, and obviously we don't want to see any of these things change. But how does the group see it when they were putting it together? Do they see that they can be, you know, all these problems can be overcome?
Were you thinking about a project in particular, like the Western Link, or?
The Western Link, for instance, obviously you want, that has to be a key part of making things work, and obviously, you know, that is something where we've seen negativity towards it, where obviously we see it as part of the bigger picture of all the whole plan and everything that's been, maybe it's because, you know, I've seen this from where I feel.
None of the allocations in the plan are predicated on another piece of infrastructure coming forward. So that's probably the sort of key answer there, I would suggest.
Peter, you want to say something?
It's a comment, really. I mean, lots and lots of houses being built, Aylsham, for example. But what concerns me is, leading on from Jonathan's point, infrastructure. You know, I use the surgery in Aylsham. What's going to happen when more and more houses, more and more people live there, and the proportion of doctors and ratios to residents, frankly, is already stretched. So this plan doesn't really address this, and yet it's an important part of the equation. In fact, I would say it's an essential part of the equation, because at the moment we're building the houses, but we're not actually providing the infrastructure that's necessary to support those houses. And you know, where does it all go?
Emma.
Vaguely linked to infrastructure. I had the good fortune to work at Hethel Engineering Centre for about 18 months, and it was a fantastic site. But my question would be, and looking at the report of the review of the plan, there is the public transport is non-existent to that. I don't know how much influence we have on that. That if we are looking to extend, and I saw in the plan we're looking to extend that site and the villages around that, actually the only way to get there is by car or shared car. So I just wonder what plans we've got in there environmentally. And just to make another comment, I don't think anybody here blocked the Western Link. I think the block was to do with a vote to support when there was already a vote to support that had passed previously.
We probably, as a committee, we tried to avoid, and I don't address that just to one councillor, but just avoid the party politicking of it. We need to remove that as much as possible without it being seen as telling anyone off. Just that we'll steer clear of that. And that's something which this committee tries to avoid wherever possible, without wanting to go into reopen old wounds around something which hopefully we have dealt with and gone past and are starting. This committee's meeting today has been very much us all working together to find solutions to problems and find answers to questions. So let me just stop it at that. Has anybody got a particular point not relating to, hopefully, the Western Link?
Yeah, the thing about infrastructure has about health and schools. I think you had something on the slide before, didn't you, about it? My question was, you mentioned it in the slide, but I can't see where they're being allocated in which parts of the map. It'd be useful to know sort of the areas they're going to go. So I think you did mention there are actually mentioned we are going to expand the health facilities and the education facilities in these areas to go along with this plan, but do we know whereabouts in the map, what areas they'll be targeted in?
There's so many of them, it's impossible to sort of name them. So, I mean, there are examples. I mean, the best example probably is Marriotts Park at Taverham, where you're going to have a new district centre. In the Grove Triangle, in Sproston, or possibly Rackheath, we're looking at a new high school allocation in there. There is an appendix in the strategy which deals with infrastructure on a sort of topic by topic basis, for example, such as healthcare. Part of this plan and what we've been doing throughout the preparation of it is to talk to infrastructure providers, whether that be education or utilities companies, and this plan helps to sort of signal to the likes of those organisations how many homes and the distribution of those. And just coming back to the Hethel point, and I'm going to have to get used to not having Helen to whisper in my ear. Obviously, we're going to be seeing a planning application for any developments that come forward. As part of those applications, there would be supporting documentation. So, often you see with planning applications a travel plan on how people are going to get to and from that location. So this sets a lot of the detail for specific allocations, and also gives a policy basis by which planning applications can be determined to see whether they're satisfactory or not.
Fran, you indicated first, did you? Or was it Martin? It was Martin, sorry.
Thank you. I did raise a point around this community housing planning Thursday, but I'm still feel slightly uncomfortable around the nutrient neutrality. And again, if on the 3.19, know that there was the Part 4 examination hearing around nutrient neutrality. I know that as we know on GT16, they're going to provide their own water treatment plant, and I think there's one in Wyndham as well, or another major site that's going to do that. But Beeston. So.
Yeah.
But again, I still think we know that the Norfolk Environmental Credits has received the 9.6 million, which will be used to develop the schemes. At the moment, we only have one scheme for 1.5 million. So it's really around the delivery of this plan without getting the nutrient credit scheme running efficiently and being able to deliver. How can we actually deliver the plan?
Would you like me to just comment on that? We've got a paper later on the agenda talking about the new nutrient neutrality funding mitigation money that we've got, which isn't going to NEC, just to correct that. That is something that anybody can bid into, which we will pick up later. But many schemes are now delivering their own on-site mitigation. The fact that we have been able to issue Beeston, which is 3,500 homes, with a strategy for dealing with their own mitigation without relying on credits is fantastic news. We also know Rackheath, 4,500 dwellings, is also looking to deliver their own mitigation on site. That's 8,000 dwellings we will be securing through their own mitigation. I think that is a great success story. But we also know there are mitigation coming forward, and we're about to obviously look for more mitigation to come forward to address the whole of the catchment areas for 5 local authorities. So there is good news. Permissions are being released, and we have got a number of years to deliver the plan. The fact that I think we are in a position we are in with a lot of hard work and new ways of dealing with it is a credit to this council and all the councils who are working to achieve this. So I think we are moving forward. We have, if you look at it, we've got 8,000 dwellings where we know there is on-site solutions. We know there are other sites who've got their own site solutions. So permission should come forward, and we should be looking to delivering the housing within the plan. But also, more importantly, the inspector concluded that there is a plan for us to be able to deliver our housing.
Thank you. I do concur on some of that, but again, if you take GT16, those houses are over the next 40 years, and whereas that's not the life of this plan. This plan has a limited time period. So I question whether or not that the numbers stack up.
We know that the first mitigation that has been available in the district has already looking to issue credits, and that's totaling over 1,000 dwellings already. So they are all in our plan period. So there is going to be a lot of dwellings released already through the mitigation that is coming forward in our area.
Councillor Davis, you had waved, but had you sort of shaken your head to say you don't need to now? You don't need to now. That's been answered. Thank you. Mark.
Just totally unrelated to all that, I noticed that the Broads Authority area marries up beautifully with the doomsday prediction for sea level rises. Is that actually being taken into account with the key service centres growth within that kind of little patch? Is it just being given a smaller growth and moved more towards the west?
So the Broads Authority has its own planning function, so none of our allocations in the plan are within the Broads Authority. I suppose if you're looking at Acle would be the obvious example. We are planning development to the west of the village, and well, obviously one of the big factors we take into account with any allocation that is in flood zone 1, i.e. not vulnerable to flooding.
Councillor Davies doesn't know what to speak on this. Go on.
Yeah, it's information as much as anything, just relating to what was said earlier about infrastructure, and page 87 and page 88 around soundness, para 3.30, and the inspectors identified 9 main soundness issues which were investigated through the examination and conclude that if the modifications they recommend are made, then we go to the bullet point at the top of page 88 in relation to the strategic infrastructure schemes in Policy 4 being progressed by the other bodies, including Norfolk County Council and National Highways, that these are not required to deliver any allocation. So I think that clarifies that they're not required to deliver any allocation.
Thank you. I think I'd like to move to the recommendations. Personally, I'd just like to say thank you. I can remember the joint call strategy and us trying to get a 5-year land supply issue when I was on the council before. It seemed to be, we've got to pass this to get 5-year land supply. We had this same statement made, I think, almost every meeting for 4 years, that we've got to pass this, because if not, we won't get this. And we never seem to get there. It seemed to be one of these things that, it's looking for Shangri-La or something. You're never going to find this place, but magically one day we'd get there. When you're least expecting it. And hopefully we are almost there. But Helen's epitaph will be, she delivered the 5-year land supply. So anyway, personally, I'd like to move to all the recommendations taken together. All those in favour?
And that's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't know why I ceremonially hit that button like closing every gavel every time, then realise I have to turn it back on. We now move on to the Norfolk Nutrient Mitigation Fund Schemes and Governance with Rodney back in the chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit of background on this. You may recall that Broadland put in an expression of interest to deal up for some funding to actually help secure nutrient mitigation in the catchment areas. And we were successfully awarded 9.6 million of capital funding and 622,000 of revenue funding to address nutrient mitigation issues in the catchment area. This covers 5 key local planning authorities, which is Broadland, Breckland, North Norfolk, Norwich and South Norfolk, but very much Broadland is the nominated accountable body for this scheme, which is why the reports are very much coming through to Broadland Cabinet to consider. So back in January, Broadland Cabinet sort of considered this and agreed to accept the capital funding and to commit to a programme of nutrient mitigation work. But very much said we needed to come back to a future meeting with details of the scheme and governance arrangements that would be put in place, and this report very much does that. So to summarise, the proposal in this report is very much to seek expressions of interest from any interested parties in the catchment areas to unlock nutrient mitigation. Obviously, NEC is likely to be a big bidder and a big player in this market, but it's unlikely to be the only one. So we're opening up to any interested party to say, actually, if you've got a relevant scheme, if you've got a good idea, we've now got the funding, come to us and we'll see if we can work together to deliver this. And we're very much looking to develop two schemes. One is very much a feasibility scheme, so you've got a good idea, but you haven't got all the scientific evidence to actually be able to progress and finalise the scheme to actually start delivering on it. Come to us and we may be able to provide some revenue funding to help you actually get that scheme to a point where actually it's deliverable. So that would very much be a grant payment. You've got a good idea, you need to pay for some £10,000 of scientific evidence. Come to us and we may support you to actually help you fund that scientific evidence. Obviously, you then develop a scheme, and when that scheme is sort of feasible, we think it meets all the scientific criteria and actually is a deliverable product, we're very much saying apply to this scheme, and again we will look to actually provide some capital funding towards this scheme, and very much this is about an investment in the scheme. So you've got a good scheme, we'll invest £1 million in that scheme, and we would look for you to then repay that investment in due course once you've been able to deliver the scheme and actually deliver nutrient credits to the market. We're very much aiming, as if it's approved, to get this up and running and launched from April 24, so a very tight time frame, and we're looking at a potential formal launcher parties in the area who might be interested in this sometime in May. You may say, why so quickly? Obviously, we've very much heard about the need to actually deliver mitigation in the area, to actually deliver on the local plan, but also the government funding is very much stipulating they want some seeds of movement on this, and ideally by sort of March 25 they'd like to see significant movement with this funding. You may also recall that back in January, as part of the initial report, Cabinet did agree the first sort of up to 1.5 million funding from this scheme, and that was for specific mitigation from Norfolk Environmental Credits. So that was agreed, and that has now been paid to Norfolk Environmental Credits. So the scheme is already up and running, delivering the idea of we've got the funding. We've now been able to support the first scheme under this. So obviously this is looking at working with the 5 affected local authorities, or most affected local authorities. So we need to put in place some governance to actually manage this scheme. So this report is very much saying we want to establish a nutrient neutrality mitigation officer working group and a member working group, very much so that when the bids come in for funding, we'll be able to put some, we'll be able to assess them, evaluate them, and then go back to the member working group and say, these are the suggestions come forward, do you support them or not? The member working group will do that, but then ultimately they will come up with a recommendation for what to support or not, but that recommendation will come back to Broadland as the accountable body to make that final decision. So very much the recommendation in this report is the final decision on the allocation of funding would be made by Broadland District Council as the accountable body, but obviously taking due regard of the recommendations of the working groups. Just regarding longer term, because obviously we're talking about the main funding, there's 9.6 million being an investment in the scheme, that will come back. So actually we invest it for a year, they may repay it, and then we look to invest it in another scheme in the future. So this is a recyclable fund that will keep going on until nutrient mitigation is no longer an issue. How long that will be, no one knows. It could be other legislation that changes it in 2 years' time, or it could still be an issue in 10, 15 years' time. But once it's no longer an issue, the funding will then be available back to the local authorities to actually fund schemes that actually improve and aid habitat site restoration in the long term. So very much this is seen as a scheme to develop nutrient mitigation in the short term, but longer term this money will be available to the authorities to actually help in mitigation of affected sites. But very much I think I'll pause there for comments and questions. It is quite a long report on actually, because there's quite a lot of detail behind it, but it's important to very much set out the details of the scheme. And that would be normally all I'd say, but if you'd bear with me, Chairman, I think I'd just like to say, actually, this is quite a big decision again. It's an important point, say, like the adoption of the local plan is important. This is a real milestone in actually moving forward to the we've now got some funding to deliver mitigation. So actually, I think this is again a significant step forward in the overall council programme to deliver the economic growth and the housing in the area. So I think it's worth pointing this is an important decision to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Rod. Am I correct in thinking that you said that this is a joint venture with 4 other councils, and ultimately Broadland District Council is responsible for the whole scheme working? For the benefit of the residents who are listening, how can we be sure and confident that this scheme will actually work and Broadland, as we are actually responsible ultimately for the whole thing?
That's why it's important to put appropriate governance in place for actually deciding on the schemes. So we're not going to have someone just come up and say, oh, I've got a good idea, give us £500,000. It will need to be a proper worked up business case. We'll need to make sure they've got all the scientific evidence, they've got the actual proper business plan to deliver it. So it will be a proper evaluation of that funding. On some ways, though, it's also this is grant money. So we are able to take a slight risk on some of this because the private sector is not necessarily delivering all the mitigation we need. We've heard that there are some big sites that are able to deliver mitigation on site. We are very much stepping in to fill a hole in the market. If there was a open mitigation trading scheme happening in Norfolk already, we wouldn't need to do this. But as there isn't, this is very much us intervening to make sure that actually there is that available funding in order to deliver nutrient credits and the nutrient trading scheme in order that property and planning permission can go ahead. So it's not a risk-free venture, but it is something that we need to make calculated investments based on sort of the best available evidence.
Shane.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the appendix for the expression of interest form, pages 186 to 188, which clearly sort of lays out what the scheme is and how to apply. But how will the expression of interest be advertised to attract the widest possible awareness?
Thank you. So we're obviously setting up a specific website for this. We are tapping into the contacts of people who know, as we think they might have schemes. We want to do a formal launch event, and very much it is trying to make sure that key developers know about it, landowners know about it. Essentially, anything we can do to publicise this, we will do with press releases, because it's in our interest to make sure that everyone who potentially could have a scheme is aware of this income for it. So actually, I think if it gets approved, this is a start of needing to do some formal publicity and actually get this out so people know about it.
Adrian. Yeah, just a quick one. This is obviously a capital budget, 9.6 million. You said it was money gets recycled around, but there's £200,000 being earmarked here to help with feasibility studies. Will the money be recycled back on those feasibility studies? Would we lose that money? Another one related to cost as well. Talked about recruitment of a fund manager and support, administration and technical support. Do we know the cost of that and under which budget that will be funded and covered? Because it won't be covered, I suppose, by this capital budget.
So obviously we've got the 9.6 million in capital funding, but we've also got £622,000 of revenue funding, which will be used to cover the fund manager costs and the running of the scheme and any legal advice. But also, obviously, the money is now in our bank account. It's earning interest, so actually the interest on that money can help fund some of the feasibility works. We did have quite a debate about whether you do the feasibility works on a repayable basis, but some of these schemes, you might do the evidence base and you work out it's not feasible to go forward. So it was a judgment call as to whether you say feasibility works is a grant or is it a sort of a repayable. And we thought, on balance, we need to encourage people to come forward on the scheme, so a grant basis would be sensible. But we're not going to give it to ones that we don't think are ever going to come forward. There'll need to be a hurdle to make sure that if you apply for a grant, we really think actually it's got a realistic chance of them moving on to the full scheme.
So that 200,000 will be taken out of the capital budget or out of the revenue?
The expectation it will come out of the interest earned on the capital sum. A £9.6 million sort of that's easy getting sort of a £200,000-300,000 interest on that.
Fran.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say this is really good paper. Thanks very much. I think it's very clear about what we're looking to do, and I'm really pleased to see it. I think it will be very good for developers. It will open up sites which were locked really and have been for some while. And when we're talking about getting the message out, I think it's something we really need to think about ourselves, because as local members, we know about sites that are coming forward. We talk to the developers. I know I do. I've spoken to every single developer who's coming forward in Rackies and have done for many, many years. So this should be part of the conversation. So I think we are part of that message to get the message out there that this exists and we should be using it. So I just think, we need to look at ourselves as well and get that message over. I think it's a great paper. Thank you.
I actually think the idea of the feasibility study is very clever, actually, because this is new. So actually people are going to go, well, should we? I don't know. It could be a big cost, and it will just put people off. There's natural scepticism. People will say, oh, well, we're doing all right with what we're doing. We don't need to go down this route. I think if you can drag some people's attention towards this, it should pay for itself. You only need one feasibility study to come through, and the unlocking of what that will open up in terms of development is going to pay for itself very quickly. So I think that's really, really a very good initiative. And the whole document to me makes very good sense, and it links in so much with what we're trying to achieve with the previous thing. So unless anybody's got anything they particularly want to ask, I was going to move that we go forward with the recommendations. Rodney.
Can I just not take credit for this all, because obviously we have been working with the partners as well, so this very much to get to this point, it's been very much a joint effort between all the 5 affected authorities and Sinead and people like that. So actually it's already been a collaborative process to get to this point.
So on the basis that we're not doing it to thank Rodney, but we're doing it to adopt the recommendations, which I'd like to take all together, as we've not had anyone speak at any length against them. All those in favour of the recommendations?
And that's unanimous, Jim.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We move on to the Strategic Asset Management Framework, and Debbie is speaking. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. So this paper before you is to recommend that the Council adopts a strategic asset management framework for our property assets. We have just over £29 million of property, that's land and buildings, that we own. And we don't at the moment have a framework on how we manage them. Obviously that's increased over the last few years because we've bought assets such as Broadland Country Park. We've invested heavily in our temporary accommodation, and so we're probably at a scale now where we really should have a framework for us to manage those assets because they're significant value. So the asset management framework is in Appendix A. It's made up of 3 elements, and it does follow the best guidance, the guidance on best practice from both SITFA and RICS, the Institute of Chartered Surveyors. So it contains 3 elements. The first element is an asset management policy. That's on page 206 onwards. Then a strategic asset management strategy, which is from page 209. And then that's followed by an asset management working action plan, which really, although it starts on page 217, is really on page 218, where it's lifted elements that are already contained in the delivery plan and the capital programme, which members signed off at Council in February. That action plan is very much a live document, as we have new delivery plans agreed in future councils and capital programmes. Obviously that action plan will change and develop, and programmes as they finish will come off of that. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Does anybody want to ask anything? Fran?
Thank you, Chairman. It was just around the, on page 210, we've got all our assets listed there. We've got offices and like, well, it seems an enormous amount, sort of nearly 19 million for our offices. And also underneath that, it's got business support centre, which is 714,000. Is Carrowbreck one or the other, or I mean, I just want to be clear there about which one we've got there. And also with the Bure Valley Railway, obviously we've got that listed as 362,000. And I know that was valued a few years ago. Is that an up-to-date valuation? Thank you.
So the Business Support Centre is Carrowbreck there. The offices at the time did include this place as well as Thorpe Lodge. So obviously in the next reiteration of the accounts that will be done at the end of this month, that will be shown as a asset surplus and ready for sale, Thorpe Lodge. Yes, Bure Valley Railway. So these were the figures based at the valuations for the final accounts last year, so the 31st of March. And so yes, that would have been revalued. You know, that would be the current value that they were held at then.
But 19 million for our offices seems an enormous amount. If you're saying, I mean, even if we said that Thorpe Lodge was 4 million, you know, that's 15 million. This, I don't, I mean, are you telling me this place is worth 15 million now? Well, I thought we only owned half of it. So that's £30 million for this building, which doesn't seem quite right. just so we're clear. Thank you.
Yep, if you just hold on, I can get the breakdown of those three for you. But as I say, they were valued at, so they are representative of what's in the accounts in March last year. If you just don't mind waiting 2 seconds, I will find that for you. Sorry, it's struggling to load. Can I come back to you on that one, Councillor Weinmark? It might be easier than keeping people waiting.
Can I just ask? It's just a weird question. What do we actually do? We own Bure Valley Railway, or just the track bed, or just a station at one end, or what actually part do we own of that?
I'm going to ask George because I know he's the expert on Bure Valley Railway much more than I am, I'm afraid.
I'll just start by saying I'm not the expert, but I'll do my very best. So we own the whole lot, the track beds, the responsibility for the bridges, the fencing, the station buildings, etc., etc. So it's the whole path.
Thank you. Just interested to know, because I'm a big fan of the Bure Valley Railway. My children loved going there over so many years. We're probably just a bit too old now in a way for it, but it was something. It was the first thing we did after lockdowns, when you can start doing things. We went on there because you could go, and it just felt like a real treat to be able to go on it again after so long. And so I'm pleased to see that it's linked to the council in some way, shape or form. And I will constantly speak highly of it and would recommend any of you who've never been on it to go on it. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything else to ask? Martin?
Excuse me. Sorry, I was just looking at the surplus assets, and again, you just said about Thorpe Lodge going into there. But the 8 surplus assets, and I was trying to look in here because this is the asset strategy for where that was actually being dealt with as what's happening with those. I thought it might have been on page 15 under there in the actions, but didn't appear to be to me completely.
No.
Because if we've got an asset strategy, we should be knowing what we're going to do with the surplus assets.
I'll answer, if I can just come back on Councillor Weinmark's one, then I'll have a look on the spreadsheet while I've still got this in front of me. So the reason why it's showing such a large amount is it includes the Broadland Food Innovation Centre, and that's valued at over £10 million. So that's why that is so high there. Yeah,
did you get an answer to Martin's query as well? We'll just hang. If we do have any people watching online, if we all just sat completely still, like frozen like that, they'd think their internet is stuck.
So yes, they are amenity land at places like Badgers Brook at Drayton, Wood Lane at Aylsham. So they're small pieces of land, which I know Petra is looking at. George, once again, can I pass that one over to you? Is Petra looking to sell them?
I think we'll be guided by the principles that are set out in the strategic asset management plan. They've been identified as surplus because they have potential opportunity either for sale or disposal, but of course will be led by the decision that's made around the strategic asset management plan. But they are identified as parcels of land that may have opportunity for disposal.
And to add to that, obviously the strategy lays out that we should be maximising the value of our, property and buildings, and obviously if it's not used, then we should be looking to sell that. But obviously at an appropriate time. If the market was flat, we would hold on to it for a little longer until that improved.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think it's just that it's not detailed within the management plan of what's actually happening with those surplus assets, which I would have expected to see.
Thank you. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to add? Okay, well, we'll move to the recommendation to the adoption. So yeah, it's very simple. I won't read it out, but we'll go to the recommendations. All those in favour? Unanimous? Again, thank you very much. We now move to exclusion of press and public. I move that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining items of business, because otherwise information